it. Okay, so the point being is that the more we become disordered, the more demons can drive this stuff, and then the harder it becomes for the rest of us to actually follow the natural law, that is to follow the moral teachings of the church and to do what we know is right and to build virtue. On the other hand, where sin abounds, grace abounds all the more, so that the more sinful things become, the more we are capable of getting grace from God if we're faithful, and the more faithful we are to the graces, the more He's going to give us, and the more holy that we can become. So how do you keep yourself protected in the context of all this? Well, obviously, the first thing is always stay in the state of grace. Never commit mortal sin whatsoever. That's been one of my themes here. Always stay in the state of grace. Get to confession on a regular basis. Receive the sacraments. Go to Mass on Sunday days and holy days, not just Sundays, holy days. Making sure your marriages are straightened out, all of that. You have to also make sure that you're praying on a regular basis. One of the things that we discovered, it took us a while. I've been doing solemn exorcisms for about 16 to 17 years. And my lay assistant who does my initial vetting, my nickname for him is the curmudgeon. And the reason I call him that is because he's a curmudgeon. But he's just exactly the type of guy you want in this, because there's always people that are trying to they just want to see me. They don't need my help, right? So he's very good at weeding these people out. But anyway, he's been helping exorcists for almost 25 years. And so we sat down one time, and there's a long story behind it. But what we basically did is we started this thing where we started putting people on a prayer prescription, which is saying the Angelus 6, noon, and 6, and the prayers of the Auxilium Christianorum. You can look that up online. There's an app for it. The prayers of the Auxilium Christianorum at that same time, 6, noon, and 6. And what we started to notice is that the diabolic influence in people's lives began to wane significantly. We even saw people self-liberate from possession by doing this every single day. It took them about 6 months, but they did it. And what we began to realize is that in watching the patterns, because he and I just sit and watch patterns, right? He's a lawyer, but he actually used to do ranching, and so we sit and watch patterns, right? And from the very beginning, as soon as I started working with demons, because I'd written books on psychology, I was watching the patterns, so I could separate out, okay, this is psychological patterns that are proper to a demon, this is a human being, and this is what it looks like when they're mixed. And one of the patterns that we started to notice is that when people do that on a regular basis, the demons were basically vacating, or it kept people immune from diabolic attack. Well, two things started to emerge. The first is that exorcists are starting to notice that most liberations are now revolving, not all, but most liberations of people who are possessed are revolving around two areas of Catholic doctrine, either the incarnation or the passion, specifically the precious blood. And so we started noticing that a lot of people were being liberated because it had something to do with the connection to one of those two doctrines. The second thing that we started to notice was it was the same reason why exorcists used to say that the way you break diabolic oppression, which is attack from the outside, is by just increasing your prayer life, and over the course of time it would just slowly taper off. But what we started to notice is that the common element in people who are diabolically obsessed, people who are being attacked through oppression, even people who are possessed, was an elementary lack of discipline in their prayer life or spiritual life. Elementary. I don't care if you're saying the rosary every day. That's not what I'm talking about. You should. You need to be saying the rosary every day. But we're talking about something that requires a consistent self-denial day after day. Getting up at 6 and saying the Angelus at 6 and doing the prayers of the Auxilium Christianorum. Can't tell how many people, well, can I get up at 7? No, it has to be at 6. It's that discipline of maintaining that on a regular basis is what actually breaks the diabolic hold over them, and they stop attacking the people. So it's this elementary lack of discipline in people's spiritual life. So if you want protection, you have to start developing a consistent prayer life, but you also need to be engaging in forms of mortification where it's consistent. It requires daily self-denial. It doesn't have to be huge. It just has to be something in which you're doing that on a consistent basis. This is something which we do even in our own community, right? Because our community, which does exorcism, we pray 3 to 4 hours a day, 3 to 4 hours. And that's what keeps us largely immune. The other thing is when we're in solemn session, we're fasting 6 days a week on 1 meal a day. We do it consistently, and that's what keeps us protected. We know it's not us. We know it's God who's honoring our sacrifice for that. But it's that consistent discipline that keeps people immune. The other thing is too again, you can say the prayers of the Auxilium Christianorum. It's a group that was started by 2 exorcists. We think there's about 400,000 people worldwide saying the prayers, and it's actually a group. It doesn't take long to say the prayers, 5 to 7 minutes a day. If you say it every day, everybody that's a member, and all you have to do to become a member is say the prayers, everybody who's a member is praying for everybody else who's in the group. And so as a result, you're literally plugging into the prayers of 400,000 people for your spiritual protection for you and your family. The other thing is we've seen people liberated from possession just saying those prayers. It's a phenomenal diagnostic tool. One time this one family was having problems with their daughter, and I said, well, here, start saying the prayers of the Auxilium Christianorum. From the time they started saying those prayers to the time they stopped, the daughter would scream uncontrollably. She didn't even know they were praying them. So this is an indicator that the demons, they don't like these things, right? So that's always a good sign. Developing virtue, making sure you eradicate any vice or any defect. You have to know the mechanics of the spiritual life. You actually have to also know the Catholic faith. We are not living in a time where you can be ignorant of your Catholic faith. If you are, you will get mopped up. Not just by what's going on in a culture, but by the demons themselves. Every single individual that we deal with that is possessed has some failure of understanding in some point of Catholic doctrine. Every single one of them. We are also finding that a vast majority of the people that show up on our doorstep don't even understand the basic catechism of the Catholic Church. They don't understand even the basics. We are not living in a time in which you can do this, especially as priests and bishops get weirder and weirder. Fortunately, you got good priests here. But as they get weirder and weirder and weirder, which is happening, you just watch it. It's like a daily score. You can sit back, get the popcorn, and see which bishop said what nutty thing, right? The fact is that you have to know your faith. Because if you don't know your faith, you're likely to do something that's going to cause you harm spiritually. And so this is something that the demons are going to do. The other part about it is demons attack vocation, which means they're always going to attack marriage. How do they attack the marriage? Remember this perspective on the image? The first thing they do is put a perspective on the image of one spouse to another in order to psychologically divide them. If you feel you're psychologically divided from your spouse, you've already been mopped up. They've won to some degree, and you're going to have to fight that. You're going to have to start looking at your spouse different, right? And I tell women, because one of the aspects of the curse of Eve is that when Eve ate the fruit, she's like, what if he doesn't eat the fruit, right? And then what does he do? What's the first thing Adam does when God says, why'd you do this? He threw her under the bus. So as a result, women, part of the curse of Eve is they think their husband, and I tell women this, yes, we all know, your husband is the dumbest guy that walks the face of the planet. We all know that. We know your husband's dumb. We all know that. That's what they have to fight and deal with, right? By the way, your husband might be dumb, but the point being is that, and two, sometimes the wife will say, what do you think? I get it, okay. But it's also the same thing in relationship to the wife. I mean, the guys can, man, she just talks constantly, right? They did brain studies. They found out, just to lighten us a little bit before I finish up and then we go to Q&A. When they did brain studies, they found out that women get 10 times the amount of pleasure drug in their brains when they talk than men do. All you have to do is look at it. The guy's sitting there, and the wife's like, no. All right. But I tell people that's actually a perfection. It's just immoderated. Here's why. They discovered this boy in the woods it was in the 1920s, I think it was. There was a boy who was about 10 years old running in the woods of Germany. He was naked running around. He was running so fast he could actually keep up with the deer, and they actually think that the wolves were the ones that nurtured this kid to the point where he was running around, right? Well, they captured the kid, and he knew zero language. So they tried to teach him a language, but what they found out is that he could never master definite articles or indefinite articles. You just couldn't, like us and thus, you just couldn't get them. And philologists for the longest time said, well, they just must not have trained him right. So then what happened is this was in the 1980s, they found a girl who was 12 years old. Her parents thought she was retarded, and so they had locked her in this room and fed her, and they never talked to her, never let her out, never let anything, and so she literally knew no language. So then they tried to teach her, same problem. She could not master definite articles. You actually see this with people in certain Asian languages where there aren't definite articles. When they start learning English, they have a very hard time mastering definite articles and indefinite articles, but also number, right, in relationship to certain things. And so then they started doing brain studies, and what they found out is, first of all, I'm sure you've all noticed, especially if you've gone to another country and you're learning a language, that women speak much more clearly than men do, as a general rule, right? What they found out is that in the beginning stages, for the first 5 years of the child's life, the neurons are starting to develop specific pathways. And if the mother specifically doesn't talk to the child on a regular basis, those neurons do not develop the pathways, and it causes literal brain damage. So I tell people, the inclination that God gave to women to talk is a perfection. It's just it's meant for the children and not the husband. Okay, why is all this so important? Is because the demons are going to use even our perfections against us, right? And they're going to attack marriage, they're going to attack your vocation, they're going to attack all sorts of things, and you just have to, you don't be paranoid. You know, I'm one of those guys that, you know, when I get done beating up a demon, I'll tell you a story that's kind of funny, but I get done beating up this demon, I'm done. I'm ready to go have a cigar and some scotch, right? And this one time, this one demon, it took me a while to figure out what he was doing, but he was causing super vivid dreams at night to me. And it took me a little while to get a handle on it, to stop him from doing that. But in the dreams, he was actually revealing to me his experience of the sessions. And so one of the things that he revealed in one of these dreams was that he was incensed at the fact that during the sessions I would just show up, beat him mercilessly, and then just walk off like nothing happened. Just really annoyed him. Okay. So, that being the case. So to keep yourself protected, the main thing is to do it. If you lead an authentic Catholic life in all of its richness, that means not just Mass, but also using the sacramentals, that the church offers, like the Benedict Medal, the scapulars, things like that, using holy water, etc., living a full Catholic life as it's understood from the tradition coming to us, your odds of becoming extraordinarily diabolic influence are nil. You're going to be tempted, but that's because that's just our lot in life until we die. But so everybody suffers that to some degree or another. Even Christ suffered it, for our sake, of course. Not because he was weak, but quite the contrary. So the point being is that if you're leading an authentic Catholic life, your odds of becoming diabolically influenced are very rare, and you're less likely to suffer extraordinary temptations. One last thing. Remember this point where I was talking about elementary discipline and how it keeps demons away? One of the patterns we just sorted out in the last year that we were watching is that families who have not lost a child, and each child in the family, when they reach the age of majority, continues leading the Catholic faith, they have one thing in common, and that is this elementary discipline. There's a consistency in self-denial in the family on a regular basis. And this means it was, requiring them to pray at certain times, or requiring them to do self-denial, requiring them to do certain things, fasting on a regular basis, requiring the children to do that so that when they come out the other end, the percentage of loss was practically nil. Even families that prayed together, a lot of times they would stay together, but we found that undergirding that has to be this elementary discipline that you have to instill in your children. And that's one of the principal ways you will protect them as well. Oh, and last, stay under the authority structure, both in the church, so you have to stay in the church and stay under its authority structure, because that's where one of the primary aspects of authority is, but also you have to follow this traditional Catholic understanding of the family structure and its authority structure within the family. The husband has to be the head of the household. And I'm not saying this because I'm against women. Quite frankly, there's all sorts of women that are holier than their husbands. The issue isn't whether you have power or not. That's demon talk. If you actually look at the feminist movement, it is the curse of Eve on steroids. But if you follow the traditional Catholic understanding of the husband is supposed to love his wife, which means he's going to exercise authority not for his sake but for hers. He'll be sacrificial for her, he'll love her, he'll do what he needs to do in order to what's best for her. Then on the other hand of it, if she submits, then she can stay under that authority structure and she's likely to be protected. It's the same thing with children. We know this. We know that when children step out from underneath the authority structure of their parents, they get hurt. It's the kid who's playing in the yard. You tell the kid, don't go run out into the street. He runs out in the street and he gets run over, right? Because he didn't stay underneath the authority structure. The same thing is true even on a spiritual level. So follow that traditional family structure, do it in a rightly ordered way, in a loving way, and then as a result of that, then over the course of time, it will provide that level of protection. Okay. So we're going to stop, and we'll have about 30 minutes of Q&A. So. I'll just take the part. Okay, so I'll answer these until we get to 30 minutes and then we'll kind of cut it off. Part of the reason I cut it off at 30 minutes is because if we don't, we'll be here forever. All right. When an exorcist beats up a demon, what does that mean? Well, in the early church, there was actually part of the rite was you'd slap the demon out of people. We don't do that anymore. Okay. Although there was one time I said that to this woman who was possessed, and she just looked at me with all seriousness, whatever it takes. Right. Okay. So basically what that means is it primarily means saying the prayers of the church, the ritual, the solemn rite of exorcism. It also means saying other kinds of prayers, making him reverence certain things, making him, applying relics and various other sacred items to the parts of the body that they possess, making them say prayers. Making them admit certain things. And so it's basically getting them to do things that are contrary to the will, which causes them pain. And then as the pain increases, they become weaker, and then they're likely to give you the information that you need. So it's largely about using prayer yourself, but then also making them do prayers or doing certain kinds of prayers, and then they'll do that. Or also just, reverencing relics, things of that sort will cause them. That's what we mean by beating them up. Okay. And it's brutal to them. The experience that a demon has in session is far more extreme than we even see as the exorcist. It's something that took me a while to realize that this guy's in a lot more pain than he's letting on, or that he's even able to manifest. And part of that has to do with the fact that the human body has limitations. And if he was to show the full extent of his pain through the human body, it would literally kill the person. That's how much pain they're in. Will our intellect and will, after we die, work like it does while we're alive? No, it works a little bit differently in the sense that your intellect normally can only understand something when you have something in your imagination, St. Thomas says. And so we no longer have our imagination. So our knowledge in heaven is more like angelic knowledge. And so we understand what's going on, we know certain things, we know what's going on in this world, but it functions more like angelic knowledge. Do demons know what we're thinking? Okay, so there's a few ways in which demons can surmise or know what you're thinking. The first is by divine revelation, which virtually never happens. God reveals to them this is what the person's thinking. The second part is, remember when I said that they watch our psychological patterns, they watch us all our life, and they look at us and they say, and spouses do this with each other, right? Spouses will I know what you're thinking, right? And so it's because they know by the way the person's reacting or the way they're behaving, what they're thinking. It's not an absolute, but so it's the same thing in relationships. So demons can watch our patterns, but they can read our body and have a sense of what's going on. So, for example, when you lie, the temperature around your eyes increases. So that's an example of it. They also know when you lie, there's certain other physiological patterns. So they can kind of tell by your patterns of thinking and what you talk about, they can start seeing your physiological reactions and sometimes make the connection. So that's one of the ways. The other way that they can know what you're thinking is if you tell them. The third way that they, or the fourth way that they can actually know is if they put a thought in your mind and you don't resist it, they know you're thinking it. So that's one of the ways. Can a long-term marriage with an alcoholic husband be in the proper order of authority? Yes, but it's going to take a little bit of work to get him to kind of come up to speed, because the alcoholism is affecting his ability to obviously to govern in a rightly ordered way. And so what she needs to do, though, is start finding certain ways in which she can, there might be, if he's an alcoholic to such a point he can't even function, well, then she's going to just have to assume certain responsibilities, but once he would overcome the alcoholism, then she needs to give them back, which is sometimes difficult. But there's also, sometimes if a guy's a functioning alcoholic, there's certain things you just have to let him exercise his authority in when it's rightly ordered, okay? How does a faithful parent educate their children to be vigilant in their spiritual life without making them feel there's a demon behind everything? It's actually a good question. I think the best way to do it is just teach them to say the prayer of St. Michael, and then when they get a temptation, just say, well, when you get a temptation, you just tell the demon to stop it or what have you. So it's a matter of teaching them based upon their state, how old they are, how much you know that they can process. And so you have to teach that. But by the time someone reaches 18, they should have at least a basic understanding of spiritual warfare, that they attack our imagination, they put thoughts in our minds, they're not always ours. They also, they can move us emotionally, etc. They should have the basics of it, and that they should be saying basic prayers to keep themselves protected. But the big dividing line is that should not be the primary focus of their prayers. Their primary focus of their prayers should be to be worshiping God, being thankful to God, and petitioning Him for things they need, etc. It should be the normal stuff of the spiritual life, and that they just engage the demons when they see them. St. Peter says, be vigilant and watchful, which basically means, if you see them pop up, you whack them down, and then you just keep moving on, right? You don't become focused on them. Don't hyper-focus on them, and don't make them the focus of your life is the main thing. One of the principal ways you keep yourself protected is by ignoring them, except when necessary. If they have to deal with them, then you deal with them. Otherwise, you just ignore them. How accurate was the screw tape letters? Fairly accurate. It's kind of shallow, but it's fairly accurate. How do demons choose who they will possess? Okay, they don't have any choice in the matter. What that basically means is this. There are two types of possession. There are possessions in which God permits them in the sense of, He says you can possess this individual, and because demons' will is fixed on the evil, it's almost like they're compulsive. They'll just do it because they're gonna choose that path, right? And so they just do it. So God says, well, I'm going to permit you to do this, and so they do it. There's other times He tells them, you must possess this person. Now that sounds strange, but we call that conscription. And basically what it is that God is allowing the possession, or He tells them they have to possess the person because there's something in the person's life or through the possession that he wants the family or the individual to come to knowledge of. So for example, there was a case that I had, it was actually two cases of sisters who were blood related. And they were possessed by some of the same possessors. One had one extra one, but the other ones had other possessors. And the reason it became clear that God basically conscripted them into possession was because of the fact that He wanted a particular generational spirit to be expunged from the family line. Right? And so a lot of times the demons don't have any control over the matter. So one of the cases I'm working on now, one of the demons was a low-level demon. His original name was Eustace, the Just One, and he had a specific relationship with Our Lady, and he had never possessed anybody. And the reason God told him you have to possess this woman is because in her battle to get this thing out, she was going to reach a level of holiness which would be identical to his level in heaven. She was going to get his place in heaven, not his relationship with Our Lady, but his place in heaven. So He uses them as instruments. They'll admit as much. They'll admit they're slaves of Christ, just unwilling. So they don't get to choose anything. right? Why does God let demons do what they do? It's for our sanctification, ultimately, okay? Have you been personally attacked by Satan during an exorcism? No, not really. I mean, okay. It depends on what you mean by attacked. If you mean by an extraordinary way, no. But there has been a couple of times during sessions where the demon would attack me internally, and so I had an experience of what the person who was possessed, what kind of a psychological attack that they were undergoing. Now, demons do not like to attack an experienced exorcist, and there's a reason behind that. Being an exorcist is like stepping into a boxing ring. Now, if you've ever talked to a boxer, an authentic boxer, they'll say you'll never really know a guy. You can watch all the tapes until the cows come home, but it's not until you're in the actual ring with him that you get a sense of what his actual technique and method is, right? And so that means that when you're in the boxing ring, he reveals his methodology to you. It's the same thing in spiritual warfare. When the demon attacks an experienced exorcist, he can break it very rapidly, but then he can stand back and reflect on his experience and get a sense of what the attack is. And then the next time in session, he can go after him and cause the demon a lot of damage. And so they don't like to. So once in a while, I do get attacked, but not that often. There's also a general principle, is not that I like being attacked, I don't. But if I am attacked, my attitude is, at least I can keep an eye on him. Because with demons, when they're attacking you, you can watch him. Okay, there he is. We know I'm keeping an eye on you. I'm watching you. It's when they don't attack you, you have to worry. Because that means you're about to get broadsided. And so that's one of the reasons why I ask Our Lady on a regular basis, watch my flank. Right? Because I can't keep track. I'm a limited human being. Okay. So there was one time, one demon jumped up, and it was kind of like judo for like 30 seconds, where he was trying to hit me. But I've been whacked a couple of times, got decked right in the face once. But that was, and this was one of those things where, hey, literally, all of a sudden it just goes wham like that, and it just nailed me right in the eye, right perfectly. And I'm like, okay, all right. But one of the things we do is in the beginning of sessions, we do a series of prayer that clamp down on them. And I'm also a firm believer in punishing bad behavior. So when he does something like that, he pays a price. And to the point where he regrets it. That's the goal, okay? Are severe anxiety and or panic attacks related to a demon or a spiritual root? Yeah, they can be, not always. There are psychological conditions that a person can reach where that is in place. However, demons can also cause that. If not, how does one discern whether it is a biological or spiritual origin? It has to do with the specific psychological patterns. And so basically, if it's, for example, if it's psychological obsession, psychological or mental illnesses are basically the result, unless it has an organic cause, like there's something wrong with the brain, which can happen. But by the way, not every mental illness is the result of chemical imbalance. There's a book called The Chemical Myth, which is a very good book and talks about how the pharmaceutical companies actually knew in the 1980s, shortly after they had derived most of the psychotropic drugs, that they actually didn't work. Right? They knew that. But there's billions of dollars a year in them. Okay. So, and there's a whole set of brain science stuff behind that, which if it was a different lecture, I'd be happy to go into. But there's some stuff online that you can read about that. But there are certain things that are actually from a psychological cause, and a psychological mental illness is the result of rumination, so it's a habit that's built into the individual, so it's very consistent, and it responds to external stimulus. So for example, if some guy says, I think my wife's nuts, and you're like, well, why do you say that? Well, all I have to do is just look at her cross-eyed and she goes ballistic. Well, maybe there's a reason for that, but the point being is that it's just going to respond to specific things externally, right? So it's consistent and it responds to things that are external. Whereas diabolic obsession doesn't follow that pattern at all. Now they are opportunists, so they might use external stimuli, but not always. But the pattern is it'll switch on and then it'll just switch off. And there's nothing that's causing the thing to switch on and there's nothing to cause it to switch off. Priests see this pattern regularly in confession. The pattern, I'll just describe it, and any priest will say, yes, I've seen that pattern. Usually it's a young man in his 20s. He comes in, he's struggling against chastity, he's struggling to maintain chastity, and he falls. He'll go to confession. It feels like it lifts, like the temptations are gone. They'll be gone for a day or two, and then over the course of the next couple of days, the temptations set in really strong, and then he falls, and he goes to confession, and then it lifts again. So that pattern like this is diabolic obsession. Okay. And so there's things that can blow that actually out. But that's one of the patterns that you actually tend to see. So one of the things, as I mentioned, I've been doing this for 17 years and haven't written a book on psychology before I did this. I've been watching diabolic patterns, and I was able to sort out all the patterns. Those patterns are in the priest version of the book. They're not in the lay version of the book because of what we call the CSI effect. We don't want people reading how possessed people behave or the patterns that we see and then coming to us and acting it out, and because it becomes harder to discern. So, okay. So, but the other way is that if it's from a spiritual origin, it will respond to prayer, your own prayer. You say a binding prayer, or you start doing this discipline like I mentioned, 6, noon, and 6. You start doing that, you're going to start seeing it lift slowly, and that gives you an indicator that it's actually not psychological, that it's actually spiritual. Does the devil influence all sin? No, there's times we just choose stuff because we're being bad. This is an important point because sometimes, even exorcists, especially when they're first starting, they'll say, she was manifesting. Well, what do you mean? Well, she was acting badly. Well, not acting badly is not always a manifestation of a demon. We can act badly on our own. All right. How much does free will play when it comes to choosing sin? Well, sin is entirely in the will. And so the degree of the sin is directly proportional to how free it is. Okay. One time in this church, there was a guy. He was an 80-year-old man. He was sitting in the back of the church and his phone rang. And unlike this fine young man who shut it off, he stands up in the back of the church and says, I can't talk to you. I'm at Mass. Okay. What are the 9 levels of prayer? Well, you can actually, that's a whole conference on its own. I actually have a conference online called the 9 Levels of Prayer. Do guardian angels protect against possession or assist during exorcisms? And the answer is actually yes. How much an angel is allowed to influence your life and to protect you is proportionate to 2 things. The first is what God commands and intends. So a lot of times they'll just protect you from being stupid and the effects of being stupid because God says you got to protect this individual. There's other times though when the demons will have to stand back because God says you got to let them tempt them. Angels, any angel can basically, it's called prelation. Any angel, good angel, can command any demon to leave, right? With Our Lady, she's also, we say that actually technically all the saints in heaven have perfect coercive power over demons. But the difference between her and Christ is obviously Christ has it by nature because he's God, whereas with those in heaven, it's by God acting through them as instruments. But Our Lady is a little bit different. We say she has perfect coercive power over demons because of the fact that God lets her exercise it far more frequently than he allows the other angels to do, or the other saints. But the angels, so they can do it. In exorcisms, sometimes the angels will protect people. Sometimes they'll act upon the individual who's possessed, even during the manifestations, in order to protect them from certain things, maybe even psychologically. They can preserve people's psychological faculties. There has been once where one of the people who was possessed actually saw the guardian angel of my priesthood. I don't know if I mentioned this online. So when you're ordained, you get another angel, usually from the hierarchy of archangels, right? And of the people that I know that have had authentic visions, not people just saying, but I see angels. Well, God bless you. But the people who have possessed... So I've actually seen other people's guardian angels, but also there's a young boy who I'm aware of, who's 10 years old, and he can see angels. He can see them. And his description is flawless. And it lines out with what we know, how the descriptions that saints and stuff have given of them. But anyway, your guardian angel, they say, looks just like you. And the reason being is because his assigned task was to protect you. Now think about that. God created an angel whose nature was about you. And that means that when he decided to accept his assigned task, his first act, his first choice was to love you, to be willing to protect you. Obviously, he's doing it under the aspect of serving God's will. But that's it. So that's why they say they actually look like them. They say, whereas all the people that have seen the guardian angels of people's priesthood, they say they're huge, large. So what happened is this woman who was possessed, she calls me, and I tell people, look, I don't want to hear from you between sessions unless it's something I really need to hear. Well, she calls and she says, I'm pinned to the floor. And because the demons would pin her from time to time, so she hands the phone to the assistants who are assisting me during the sessions, and the assistant said, yeah, we can't budge her, we can't move her at all, they're just pinned. And I'm literally handing the woman at the gate getting on an airplane my ticket. I'm like, well, I can't do anything right now. The flight's only an hour long. I'll call you when it's done. So we get through, I get on the other end, I get off the plane, I get to a part of the airport where people can't hear me, so I call her back and I said, are you still pinned? She says, yes. So I said a simple binding prayer, bound the demon, and all of a sudden I just hear her say, I gotta go. She just hangs up. 5 minutes later, she calls back and said, well, he let up, and I hadn't been to the bathroom in 5 hours, so I had to go to the bathroom. I'm like, fair enough. Before I got on the plane, though, I didn't tell her this. Before I got on the plane, after I hung up with her, I said to the guardian angel of my priesthood, go help her. What happened is right at that moment, my guardian angel came and appeared to her and held her hand during the whole time until she was freed. So that gives you a sense of it, right? And she says, he's huge, right? So people say, how come you get such a big demon? And I say, because I'm a little guy. I need more protection. Okay. Best advice for engaged couples. Don't do it. Don't do it. No, okay. The best advice is, if you can, there is a conference that I did called the 4 Stages of Courtship. It's the structure that was laid out and it was followed prior to the collapse in Catholic countries of how courtship was to be done. And everybody who has gone through that process says that when they get married, they already have the virtues of self-denial in relationship to each other, where marriage is much better and smoother. So that's one of the things. The other thing is, too, is you have to start learning to pray together and start working on defects. You also have to be brutally honest with yourself, right? And recognizing that your spouse has issues, right? As they say, while you're dating or courting, that's the best that person's ever gonna be. Right? Okay. If there's a demon of homosexuality, and how are they repulsed by these acts? Because they have a natural law too. Their natural law inclines them towards stuff that's orderly, even though they choose contrary to it. So when they see that stuff, they feel the same revulsion of the natural law that we do. Okay. But that doesn't mean that they don't inspire it, because they want to inspire it. It's more a kind of a case with them. They're just kind of like, okay, let's get this guy to do this, right? Okay. Can you please explain what this would look like, that we should be careful not to pray binding prayers superstitiously? Basically what that means is that binding prayers are like any other prayer. They're based upon the merit and the authority that the person has in relationship to it. So authority is, like parents can say binding prayers against demons in relationship to their family. Now, the way it works is that prayer begets what it signifies. So if there is something diabolic and you say the prayers, you're going to see some type of reaction. It doesn't mean that every time you see something you say a binding prayer. I mean, sometimes you just have to take an authentic look at it and assess, is this thing honestly spiritual or not? Okay, because sometimes it's not spiritual. Sometimes it's just your kid is acting bad, right? Because sometimes people bring me these, it's always the kid's like, it's always a boy, he's 10 years old, and it's a mother, and she's bringing the kid, and she says, I think the kid's possessed. The kid is acting out of control. So then I'll just look at her and says, when was the last time you spanked him? Oh, Father, I don't believe in that. And I said, there's why. That's the story. Okay. So, anyway, that being said, okay. So, how did I get off on that? Oh, yeah, okay. So, what you have to do is you just have to use them like anything else. If you see the change, then you maintain them. If not, then you just move on to something else and you just have to pray. So, okay. Superstitiously would mean that you just, I say the prayer and this is what I get. And it's not exactly, it doesn't exactly work that way. Do guardian angels move on to protect a new person after the death of the person that they were guarding? No. The entire reason for the guardian angel's existence was to protect you and then to see God after that, and that's it. Which is kind of cool, right? So, I did time once apologize to my guardian angel. Look, I'm really sorry you got stuck with me, but okay. What are the requirements to become an exorcist? The church has several of them. He should be someone of older age. He should normally be older. He should be, and by that they mean that he should be a priest for a while. There should be a certain amount of time he's a priest because you have to be grounded. See, the Society of Priests that we have, which we only do exorcism work, and you can't even apply to be a member of our society until you've been ordained for at least 5 years. Usually we like to see 10, and most all the people that are with us now have been priests for 10 years at least. Part of that's because you have to be grounded because there is a lot of interior battles that actually occur. The demons do attack you, as I mentioned before, and it can be the first 2 years as an exorcist is a meat grinder interiorly. You're getting attacked and it's just brutal, right? And then after a while you start getting better at it and you just realize it and you beat up the demons more, and like anything else they want to leave you alone because they've gotten their nose bloodied a few times and they don't like you any more than you like them, okay? In fact, they hate you. I was telling the people at the lunch this afternoon one time, this one demon said to me, he says, I hate your guts. And I said, no, you don't hate me, you hate him, referring to God. And he says, oh, I hate him, but I hate you too. I'm like, yeah. All right. Okay. So you should be of a certain age, you should have a certain level of piety, which basically means that you need to be someone who understands that you need to be under the authority of your bishop. You have a devotion to the office of your bishop. Doesn't mean your bishop's perfect. You should also have a certain level of spiritual life that needs to be placed. You need to be knowledgeable. This is the one problem we have. People ask me, how many are the exorcists there are in the country? About 130, but only about 20 know what they're doing. And a lot of it's because they just don't have proper theological backgrounds, or they just haven't had the proper training, or their training was bad. So what training is required? So I used to teach at the Leo XIII Institute, which is actually a place where it was started more or less by the bishops. The bishops asked it to be started. And so I taught there for a number of years, but then I stopped teaching because what was happening was it's a 2-year program, and most bishops are like, I can't wait 2 years, I need somebody now. So then our society started a program where you come, it's a 1-week intensive academic course. It's 8 hours straight per day, crushing everything you need to know in order to be able to understand how demons work. And then we invite people to come in and sit on session so that they actually can see this is the flow of the session, this is how the demons have to be behaved and how they have to behave and how you have to handle them, what to do, what not to do on a practical level, because demons act within a specific gamut and you need to know what those are, but when they act within that, you need to know how to react in relationship to them, Okay. How can you tell the difference between someone who needs an exorcism and someone who has a mental health issue? As I mentioned, there's very distinctive patterns. I just spent last weekend talking to psychologists about those patterns and the differences in those patterns. So, as I mentioned, I kind of gave the example of diabolic obsession. With possession, they still show the same patterns as obsession, but there's also certain things that actually happen, which there's things that are going to occur that cannot be explained psychologically. So you might have heard there's a bishop in Switzerland who's done away with exorcists and says, we don't know this, it's all psychological. And so people say, well, what do you think? And I said, well, if I'm in session and some guy levitates and sticks to the ceiling, that's not a psychological problem. People changing shape women turning into figures of men or animals. That's not a psychological problem, right? Somebody telling me or speaking a language they never knew. The first case of possession I had, this guy spoke a form of Phoenician that has been defunct for 3,500 years. He didn't even finish high school. So that's not normal, right? That's not a psychological problem. Okay, so that's one of the ways that you can tell. This is going to be the, okay, actually. Just want to get one last question. The person's probably going to think, oh, he picks mine, okay. Can you explain how demons are controlling the government? Ooh. Okay. Some of these are, I kind of answered these online, but they're really long questions. So one of the things that we can do to protect ourselves and our family, I already mentioned this, one of the things is to start developing devotions on a regular basis, but as I mentioned, prayer on a regular basis. Developing the discipline in the family. Okay, every week, we're going to, Wednesdays and Fridays, we're going to fast. It doesn't have to be extreme, but there should be some, it should be something that is, a little taxing, a little difficult. If the bad angels were condemned for one bad decision, what hope do we have, and why is God so patient with us? Well, the reason he's patient with us is because we're stupid. Right? I mean, we are. That's why, basically, so mercy, God's mercy is not unconditional. If you've heard that, that is absolutely false. God's mercy you get God's mercy from one of two reasons. One, because of contrition, you're contrite. And why is that? Because in contrition, you're looking at your sin and intellectually you've been corrected. Because when we choose a sin, we choose it under the aspect of the good and we think it's good. But when we're contrite, we recognize, no, that was bad. So there's that correction of us intellectually. And then we desire to change. And so God cuts us mercy. So God gives mercy to the contrite. It's right in Scripture. The other one is to the stupid, right? Well, you just didn't know better. Right? But we have to be careful even with that because of the fact, so those are the two people that get God's mercy. So there's some people that God just cuts slack because of the fact that they're just, they just didn't know any better. However, you have to be really careful with that because sometimes people say, oh, well, these people just don't know any better. Well, that's true. Sometimes it is true. Some people have psychological conditions or sometimes they just don't know. They never were taught that these things were bad. You see that in relationship to modesty. Most women have no clue what modesty is, and it's just because they just don't know, right? So that being the case, but on the other hand, St. Thomas says that there's certain inclinations of the natural law for which there is no excuse. And if you commit the sin, you can't feign ignorance. Now, if you've lost use of reason, or there's been some type of malformation in your life to where you're not capable intellectually to grasp these things because of psychological reasons, well, he's going to cut you some slack. But as long as you have use of reason, St. Thomas says, there's no excuse. The example he gives is that fornication is mortally sinful. Now, think of that. How do we know this is true? You talk to couples that have been shacking up. So 98% of couples shack up now. Catholics are 97%, so we're not much better. So 98%. If you talk to them and you say, you really should get your relationship straightened out, every one of them will say, yeah, it's true. They know, right? So, okay. So the moral of the story is that contrition for human beings is because we're stupid, and this is why Eve said, I was deceived, right? So, and that's why, because she didn't fully understand, and that's why God cuts us slack. But the demons were not deceived. They fully knew what they were doing, and that's why their one choice was fix them permanently. Whereas with us, as I mentioned, because we're not that bright, it takes us a while to kind of fully form ourselves and get our wills fixed in the good or evil. Okay.